Welcome back to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my good buddies, Greg Sterling and John Gerard. Neil Polachek wasn't able to make it today, but welcome back to the show. How's it going? What's going on?
Good.
Nice to see you, Andy. Good to see you, Greg.
Purple shirt day for me.
Looks good on you.
Well, yeah, it's always a challenge what to wear on a podcast like this. So I just threw this on at the last minute. TMI. I'm entering into TMI territory. I'll just leave it at that. Back to you, Andy.
Well, let's get into it. Today we're going to talk about 5 stories that are shaking up the AI world. First up, Apple, Samsung, and Perplexity. A lot of stuff going on there. A major shift in the search mobile landscape that could be on the horizon. So we'll unpack that. Then Murati's Thinking Machines company. Mira was the CTO at OpenAI. She started her new company. They just raised a cool $2 billion, hot on the heels of Ilya Sutskever's $3 billion raise for his company, Safe Superintelligence. So tons of money being thrown at this. We'll jump into that. Meanwhile, Google's Assistant is out and Gemini is taking over. We'll dig into what that means for Android users. And the first AI browser is coming into the market. We talked about that last week. There's another one with Genspark that was just released this week. So the future of customer experience is changing. We'll talk about what that means. And then finally, our favorite part, notes from the field. We've been hands-on with AI apps this week, and we've got some surprising takeaways. So let's jump into it. And let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Perplexity. They just put a deal together with Samsung. Apple's been making some noise about possibly acquiring Perplexity. Greg, you want to lead off with this one?
I don't know if the investment. So we talked, I think, a couple of weeks ago about Samsung considering a major investment in Perplexity, and I was on vacation last week, so I didn't see any follow-up. But that was going to be a fairly major investment, and Samsung was going to incorporate Perplexity into Galaxy devices in a couple of different ways, although it was still not entirely determined. And then there was this Bloomberg story that exposed that Apple had talked about potentially acquiring Perplexity to kind of help them catch up in AI, but that's very much uncertain. Perplexity is valued, I think, most recently at $14 billion. They're in the process of raising a lot of money, which may increase that valuation. And that's a really big acquisition for Apple. That's much bigger than what they're accustomed to doing. So, it's really uncertain whether they're going to try and pursue that. And at the same time, Perplexity is out there touting increasing search volume growth, that they're getting more usage, they're gaining. So, seems like they're in a good position. It would be really interesting if Apple were to kind of make a bold move and buy Perplexity. Implications for their entire Apple Intelligence suite and also for search. We're still awaiting the outcome of the Google antitrust remedies trial. One of the proposed remedies is that Google gets bounced from that default Safari relationship and doesn't have to pay Apple $20 billion a year to maintain that. So there's a lot of things up in the air here, and really interesting to contemplate all the impacts that might happen depending on how it resolves.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we talked about Apple having to acquire somebody in the space. And after I heard about that deal and a few articles that I read around this, I read one article that mentioned something that I thought just stuck in my head, which is Perplexity's $1 billion idea was to crawl the web and have that, it's a large language model, but to crawl the web and have that be a differentiator for them. They really claim that space, and they've done something really unique. And certainly ChatGPT has caught up and Claude has caught up and added that ability.
But Perplexity is much more of an AI-driven search alternative than ChatGPT or Claude, which have web search, but you can go to Perplexity and get a more familiar search experience from them.
Absolutely. And and the way that they summarize the stories is different, and the way that you interact with that summary is just a little different. So they gave some rethinking to the whole search experience and what that's like. They really went deep into that, but it really started with this idea of let's be the AI version of searching the web, and it was and still is a huge differentiator. When Apple looks at this as an opportunity and they say, hey, wait a second, how much do we pay Google and how much do we earn from search? And if we can quickly earn a significant market share in search ourselves, what does that do for our valuation? And, when you stack all of that up, the numbers kind of are like peanuts compared to them. Or what's the alternative really for Apple?
Well, they could buy the French company Mistral, or there's a couple others out there that they could try and buy or, work with. But if they did have something like Perplexity, which is essentially an AI search engine, they could expand advertising, which is something that they flirted with and have talked about. I mean, they're slowly and surely building out a bigger ads business, and it's a logical place for them to go. It's fraught for them because they built their brand around privacy, and a lot of ad targeting is based on stuff that, they have argued against. But they could certainly pretty quickly implement a paid search business, assuming a Perplexity acquisition or something comparable, that could be quite significant. And as you say, much more significant than the $20 billion that they're getting annually from Google.
And so if you take that idea and you go, okay, so search might be the very first kind of inning of that game. But then if you start to embed it into how you're using your phone and you create these contextually relevant experiences, more like the way Meta does with Instagram or Facebook, where there's some discovery or contextually relevant, ads that show up in your feed, it's a much different experience then. And then the advertising gets interwoven with your overall experience. That can become very compelling and even useful, I would argue, as long as it's not disruptive. And when you have this co-pilot experience, you sort of bleed the edge between social media and like your own kind of personal social media, like all the different sides of your interests of what you do, how it can insert some messaging in there that could be timely or relevant.
Right. I mean, one of the big propositions of AI is the long memory. I mean, you sort of infinite memory now that ChatGPT has, and how that can help personalize feedback and results and so on and so forth. I mean, this is one of the really interesting areas that's kind of consistent with what you're saying. So the kinds of suggestions and ads and so on and so forth that could be delivered would potentially be quite different than the current state of things.
Yeah, I could really imagine an experience if Apple acquired Perplexity, where right now Apple just recently released in this latest iOS version a summary of your alerts that come through, right? And that's like very early, kind of stage type of thing. If Perplexity was woven into that user experience, I could very much see how not only do you get the summary of that, but then you can query it, you can ask it questions, you can have it tell you more, in which case it bleeds the edges or bleeds the lines between what a publisher might provide and what Perplexity might provide, and how you could add your own conversation into that mix, much like social media does. But we've asked on this podcast before, like, what is the AI sort of equivalent of social media, in this next phase? Maybe it's like monomedia or something. I don't know what you call it, but it's like your you and you conversation of like,
well, I mean, it
and device, and you're able to query that and have that conversation, and threaded through in all of that, you've got maybe some advertising or other kind of personalized experiences.
Well, I mean, we don't probably have time to get into this today, but it raises this whole question that we were talking about ahead of time about what is the business model for the the information providers, the news publishers, or the publishers who are providing the content behind the scenes. Because if you're, and we'll talk about this with the AI browser, if you're primarily interacting with content at a layer of abstraction that's AI generated, you're not seeing the ads, or you're not paying as much attention to the ads, or you're not engaging with the website as much as you are its content, but presented to you through the filter of AI.
Yeah. Yeah. And what if that, advertising experience was very different? I mean, when the web first came online, banner ads were created, and then it evolved, and now it's video ads, and now it's a whole bunch of other, kind of ad types. What if this next ad type is just threaded throughout the conversation that you have with your device, or threaded throughout your customer experience, where, maybe it's a nudge. Maybe it's like, hey, and it's probably not going to be displayed like this, but maybe it's something to the effect of, hey, I saw that you needed some tires for your car. You were searching on tires in places nearby. This place has a discount, and it becomes useful advertising in that kind of a way.
I think that's Google's vision. I mean, I think that they envision taking the content of the conversation and making suggestions in the form of, ads that may not be things that they currently would serve an ad for. If you're doing an informational query about, taking a trip to some, Italy, or looking at buying a new car, or try to compare vehicles, should I buy this or should I buy that? I think they see putting ads in those kinds of interactions that drawn from whatever you're talking about. Oh, here's a hotel, or here's some flights, discount flights, or here's an offer, a zero APR offer on one of the models that you're thinking about. So I very much think what you're saying is consistent with their vision.
And so, like, if you kind of pull on that string a little bit and you go, okay, so we've all experienced the algorithm on Instagram, for example, that gives you that dopamine hit and keeps you, glued to getting your next reel. What if that experience is similar? Maybe it's not user generated. Maybe some of the content is user generated and aggregated from around the web, but maybe it's generated by AI also, and you create this kind of experience based on your interests, and the things that you scroll past are okay. We'll show you less of those, but the things that you watch become part of your profile, and then in the background there's some generative stories and AI, kind of content that gets presented along with advertising that's all woven in. There's always been this kind of promise of, you watch TV and I want to buy the shoes that person's wearing, or whatever, that table.
Well, you can do that. You can actually do that already.
Yeah,
on YouTube.
But what this does is that this puts that kind of concept front center, where it's, a brand placement, type of thing that's really woven into the content.
Yep.
Creates that super highly personalized and specialized
for better or for worse. For better or for worse.
It may very well be the next generation of this type of experience. And I can see how, whether it's Samsung or Apple who buys Perplexity, somebody's going to buy them, and and they'll extrapolate these kind of user experiences. All right, and in our next story here, Mira Murati was the CTO of OpenAI, and she left and started her own company called Thinking Machines Lab, and they just raised $2 billion. This is just on the heels of Ilya Sutskever's company called Safe Super Intelligence, SSI, that raised $3 billion about a year ago. So couple of seed rounds, not too shabby for raising that kind of a seed round. I can't even imagine what you do with $1 billion and you don't have a product yet, but everybody's a believer in both of them, and that's quite a testimonial to throw $5 billion at a seed company.
The cynics will say this is all evidence of the bubble, and there's no product. People are just betting on her, which is not. She's a very smart person with a track record, so maybe that's not a crazy thing. But the amounts of money here is kind of mind-boggling. It's just people trying to get in. AI is the hottest space in tech, and they want to just get in, and by virtue of their early entry, make a big score at the end. I mean, I think I wouldn't bet against her. I don't know. Safe Superintelligence is a questionable business name, but I don't know what to say about it. It's kind of astonishing that people are throwing this much money at these companies who, which is largely speculative, but there's just enormous amounts of money circulating. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about how Zuckerberg Meta was enticing OpenAI employees to jump ship with the promise of $100 million bonuses. I mean, it's just shocking, those amounts of money. And this sector is awash in money. Some of it will work, and some of it will not. But it's kind of amazing. It's kind of an amazing thing.
I have to imagine that both of these companies are a bit of a fund in a way, right? Like, meaning not putting all that money on one play. The space is moving so quickly, you have to kind of hedge your bets and have a few different areas that you're going to be developing in this kind of environment. So maybe, if you're raising $1 billion, maybe a chunk of that is going to a hardware part of the business. Maybe a chunk is going to a software part of the business. Certainly a chunk is going towards talent and acquiring talent and paying people very well. You mentioned that prior to the show starting. But, there have to be a few different coordinated plays going on here to create some differentiation. And perhaps, a good chunk of that, maybe even half of it, is going to acquire other companies or roll them up or invest in them and ride the elevator up as an investment company. It's like a VC. Not quite sure, but the fact that her company is called Thinking Machines Lab indicates that
Right.
Maybe there's more to it than just a single product type of solution.
The Information had a report that one of the products, if I can use that term, or one of the ways in which they intend to compete is by creating kind of custom AI models for individual companies. Now, obviously, they're not going to do that for every single company, but some customizable AI capability that enterprises can use in a kind of secure internal environment to run, their own data, or it says designed with the company's specific KPIs in mind. Now, you can do that today by putting a version of some of these models on your own servers, or having it'll break down when I start to try and talk technically about all of this stuff. But it's not a totally unique value proposition, but maybe they'll build out something that's more capable and more tailored to individual companies than the enterprise models of these foundational LLMs.
And it could also be joint ventures with those companies, right? Where they just
Right.
become the think tank for those companies and create teams around them. But
That's sort of a consulting model, like a Accenture style thing, but at a different level of scale.
with a fund
Yeah.
attached to it to say,
Right.
we'll provide you with talent platform and a product, a unique product solution, but we'll go into it as a joint venture, and maybe that becomes sort of this hybrid of not investing in startups as a VC would, but at the enterprise level, could very well be more of like a private equity kind of play to build out solutions for those kinds of enterprise businesses, and then acquire other companies that fit that category, that business.
Right. Right. Very interesting sort of way to think about it.
Could very well be. There has to be some dimension to it, other than it just being another LLM or another,
Well, right, and there is this sort of commodity quality to some of these things, even though they all have slightly different personalities and they're good at slightly different things. I find myself just in my own day-to-day behavior moving between ChatGPT, which is my primary tool, and Claude for certain things, and even Grok for certain things. And then sometimes, very rarely, Gemini. But there's a way in which, for certain kinds of tasks, they're kind of interchangeable, not quite, but there's a risk that you bring another LLM into the world. It really needs to have some strong differentiator, or people have talked about this for a long time, and this is one of Mark Andreessen's big complaints, is that it's kind of a race to the bottom, and that these foundational models are increasingly commoditized, and so the value creation has to happen somewhere higher up the chain.
What you're talking about is primarily consumer, kind of
Yes.
space, right? But like if you think about enterprise level kind of applications and creating an AI first supply chain management solution, that
Right, they're totally industry specific B2B solutions is a real interesting area of opportunity.
exactly. And I think you've got companies like Accenture and McKinsey at the top of the pile there to create those solutions currently for these enterprise companies. But that's they're essentially using whatever LLMs and whatever technologies out in the market to be able to, kind of backfill that solution. Whereas, like, if I don't know, I have no idea if Murati's company is focused like this, but it seems to me that there's going to have to be some kind of infrastructure oriented AI platform that really rethinks supply chain, for example, and logistics. And, all of this stuff is so antiquated, that by rethinking it and coming up with systems that make it so that you can fully optimize those delivery mechanisms, that in and of itself can be groundbreaking and transform, delivery of products to happen overnight.
Well, it's a replication of what we saw with the web itself, right? I mean, there's a sort of every industry, traditional industry, was disrupted, or VCs invested in companies that were disrupting and bringing efficiencies to these other industries that had operated in theoretically antiquated ways for a long time. And this is now a version of that to all the existing software systems that operate. So you can do a better CRM or better supply chain or better fintech or whatever it is, in theory, at least. In theory. I mean, I think going to market, customer acquisition, these are all very complicated and difficult things for these companies to execute against, but at least in theory, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I mean, you could really imagine rethinking the experience entirely, and maybe this is like talking about rethinking the experience. Maybe we just move into our next topic around the AI first browser, because
Sure,
it's such a compelling kind of idea of what that experience might be, right? If you've got an AI first browser, what can you do with that might be different than just the traditional browsing experience, or going to Google to find what you're looking for, or other websites. So on that note, I was playing around with Genspark's AI first browser this week. There's a company called Genspark that is it's a large language model, but in addition to that, really they're focused on creating agents for people. And if you just use their standard solution, you can integrate. They've got 700 apps that they've already integrated, all the Google Suite products. So, Gmail and your calendar and all of those kinds of services are in there. Plus you've got, 700 of these APIs that are plugged into their platform, everything from, video stuff to, if it's on the marketing side, there's all those things. But then you've got also QuickBooks is in there, and a bunch of also financial related kind of solutions. So what that means is you can just go to the platform and you can just tell it, like, I want to connect this with that and do these things, and it'll create you a solution to be able to do that. Now, if you take that concept and you put it into a browser experience and you have agents that are part of this browser experience, it really opens up a lot to what this customer experience will be like in this new environment.
Yeah, it's totally changes your relationship to all of these things. And I mean, I think there's a B2C and a B2B version of it, but we talked a second ago about where's the value creation. Well, the value creation is in Genspark or in the browser that becomes the sort of command center for all these tasks that you can do, as opposed to going to any one of these applications. Or using Zapier or anything like that, right? So it's all of these underlying tools simply feed into the browser experience, and they become secondary. It's kind of not unlike your smartphone where you have a bunch of apps on your phone, but the phone, you still go to the apps. The phone is kind of the focal point, and you've chosen these apps, and each of them does certain things. This takes it to a completely different level where the information sources and tools are subordinated to the top level experience. And this is what I think is exciting on one level, and also very worrying for many publishers, brands, and apps, is that they just become reduced to information sources, right? I mean, we talked a couple of weeks ago about, I'm in the market still for a replacement for a vehicle that was totaled, unfortunately, while it was parked, which is a really remarkable thing. But anyway, the experience of going to all these individual car sites is incredibly inefficient. And so using ChatGPT to look for specific vehicles and price ranges with certain trim levels and so on and so forth is so much more efficient. And this is, what you're describing is an even more powerful example of that, is that I have a task, I want to accomplish that, and here's the tool that helps me do that. And I'm less concerned, somewhat concerned perhaps, if I have a favored underlying resource, but less concerned about that than just getting the thing done, whatever it is.
Yeah. So you started the conversation by talking about the value creation. I think the value creation in a lot of this is time, right? Like, help me get there faster, whatever it is that I'm doing. And so,
or simpler, right? Reducing friction and complexity.
Yes, very much. And so, so if you take that idea, one of the things, if you go to Genspark, they've got a video that promotes their whole new browser. And one of the things that they were talking about is they've got this right side panel. So every web page that you're on, you can essentially have a conversation about what's going on that page. Or if you have a question or you're reading a news story, you can create an agent on the fly that goes and finds you more news stories like that. They can pull in other related stories about that. That's one example. Or if you're in a shopping kind of environment, like your car, for example, and you're on car websites, it can ask you a question like, hey, it looks like you're looking for a car. You want me to find you the best quality and the least expensive cars that are available on the web? And all you have to do is say yes, and it'll go and find stuff for you and pull it back and do it in its,
consumer's dream.
Exactly, this seamless experience. And so, and it'll show you, like, here, if you buy this car, you're going to save $3,000, or what have you. So, or it looks like you're planning a trip to Italy. Sounds fun. Want me to find you great restaurants and recommendations from 5-star restaurants? Yeah, of course. So these kinds of things that can prompt you and really help steer you towards a solution that's going to get you to where you want to go faster. And that's a very compelling kind of value prop. And I have to imagine that Chrome is heading in this direction. I've seen some.
Yeah. So definitely with Chrome now, if you I don't know what the requirements are. I'm opted into all the experiments. You may or may not have to be opted into some Google Labs thing, but maybe not. You can update your browser, and if you select it, it'll open a panel, a window on the right side of your page, and it'll allow you to ask questions about the particular content on the web page that you're on. And I've been using it recently, and it's fairly useful. It's not a great experience, but it is useful. And sometimes when I encounter a page where there's a really long or complicated story, I'll just say, what are the main points, or I'll ask a question or something like that. It's quite useful. The concern, and so I got to imagine every single browser out there will have some version of that pretty soon. Some version of an AI experience or agent on there. It's a question of degree and how present or prevalent it is when you're browsing. So then the concern becomes, well, as a brand, as a retailer, as an information provider, as a news source, what is my relationship to this? And I know that, Bill Gross of Idealab, who created basically the paid search advertising model, has got a new AI agent browser. It's not a browser, but it's a site. I forget the URL, where he's trying to advocate a new business model that's not dissimilar for what he created with Go2, which became Overture, which Google ripped off and now is making, many billions of dollars a year. He's trying to come up with a new model that accommodates this use case where people are not interacting with web content in the same way that they were. They're not spending time looking at tile ads, and they're not necessarily spending as much time on websites as before. There has to be a way to support publishers. If you're an e-commerce provider, then you can, you're selling stuff, or you affiliates can take a commission. But the advertising model, we talked at the top of this conversation about sort of new opportunities in advertising, but it's still unclear what's going to happen when these web publishers or information providers or inventory providers become just suppliers of information or data to these higher level agents. So
Yeah.
that's big, pretty up for grabs.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Bill. Bill and I used to work at Idealab.
Right, that's right. Maybe unconsciously I remembered that.
So I love the stuff that he does, and I imagine that he's innovating in this space. I can't imagine he wouldn't. He's so forward thinking.
But he's trying to solve a real problem, I think, which is good, which is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as I think about this AI first browser kind of experience, one of the things I kind of imagine is that you got your Copilot, like app or Microsoft calls it Copilot, and they've coined that term. But truly, I think you end up with this experience where I personally don't often go through my history, for example, of what I've browsed, but and sometimes when I do, it's kind of finding a needle in a haystack. But I would love to be able to ask a question about that thing that I saw the other day on the web, and can you pull it forward, and then I revisit it, or there's so many use cases. But I can imagine that being a very easy kind of command in there. Or for example, I just planned a vacation, so that took me several hours to book all of those.
Right. It's very inefficient.
It's very inefficient. And so, being able to pin things in the experience and then tee it up. There's a few interviews that I read recently with the CEO of Signal, who was talking about the Agentic.
Meredith Whittaker. Yeah.
Yes, Meredith. And she was talking about how, in this wave of Agentic AI, everybody's kind of blowing past all of the privacy issues and data.
Oh yeah.
And but very real issues. And when you have the promise of a AI agent going and buying something for you, or putting something on your calendar, or what have you, all of the risks that are associated with giving up all of your data so that those systems can not only read that information, have access to it, or Shutter have access to your bank account, or imagine the outcomes that could run amok with that.
Well, she's absolutely right. I mean, it's an enormous blind spot for people. People are so enamored of the experience of turning their ChatGPT into their therapist, or doing all these things, which are interesting, exciting, helpful, useful. People just have no idea that all of that data, all of that information is being stored somewhere, and some third party may access it at some point.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in different contexts, that if it's in a digital form, people will want it. They're going to want it to target you. They're going to want it to sell you things. The police will want it because that's what police do. So there'll be some sort of revelation or reckoning at some point around this, and people will be really shocked by what exists. It's going to be your whole digital. It's going to be everything, and it's going to be there for the phishing and the third party taking. One of the things that's, I think, still in Trump's so-called big beautiful bill is a prohibition on states regulating AI for a decade.
Yes.
I'm not sure what the status of that is, but this is the kind of thing that states might get involved with, particularly places like California and New York, or some of the other states that tend to be more regulatorily inclined. They might do something like consumer privacy with AI, right? Restrictions around.
The front story on TechCrunch today is that Congress might block state AI laws for a decade.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying right now. Yeah,
right.
And that's in that so-called big beautiful bill, I believe, unless it's being
out. And it's going to be signed into law by Ted Cruz, which sort of has its own markings around it. Of
I mean, there's some reason to limit. When states get involved in trying to, the reason that states step up to do regulation is because the federal government hasn't, right, around privacy in particular and other things. They're trying to do consumer protection stuff. Now, sometimes they're overzealous, or sometimes they're misguided, or there are unforeseen consequences. But the intention in most of these cases is to do something beneficial for some audience, some population, typically consumers. So there are reasons to limit what states can do, because then you create a crazy quilt of differences that everybody has to comply with. But by the same token, having no regulation, I mean, presumably the feds will do some regulation, but given the cozy nature of the AI people and the Trump administration, it's unlikely that we're going to see much, if any, regulation at all. And so by blocking the states, they open up this kind of vacuum for the market, which will take all the data that is available and distribute it far and wide. That's what has happened with internet advertising.
It's pretty remarkable when you look at a timeline like 10 years. 10 years is a very long time, first of all. But 10 years
in technology, it's a millennium practically, And
it's not just technology, it's AI, right? So
right.
The things that have happened in the AI space in the past 2 years has just gone so fast.
Yeah.
And we haven't even hit stride yet. I mean, this is the first couple of innings. Once you have infrastructure and you have all these other pieces in place, and we hit a scale, things are just going to happen so quickly, it's going to blow people's minds. And
well, that's an argument not to regulate.
Yeah,
that's one argument not to regulate. That things are moving so fast. Yeah.
I totally get that why you wouldn't want to regulate that. But if you look back at, our timeline with the web, for example, and you say, okay, so 1995 to 2000 was the first, that was Internet 1.0. It got, it built the browser, it built the early stages of user-generated content, and became the platform for the next phase that became social media and video, which became the next phase for mobile. And all of these phases happened over a 20-year period, let's say. what we're talking about is that 20-year period really just happened like in the past couple of years.
Yeah,
With
it's very condensed and very accelerated comparatively. Yep, I totally agree.
yeah,
So there has to be some thought given to these issues of privacy, who can access this data. There has to be some level of education. This has to, people are talking about like, oh, we want to avoid some extinction event, right? I'm sorry, I can't do that, Dave, kind of stuff, or Skynet or whatever. People are talking about that, but there's many, many more mundane concerns that are problematic that need to be thought through in tandem with the development of these technologies. And
I mean, look, phishing, like just that alone. I mean, if your data is out there and you know how to pick the lock on an AI model that gets you, a lead generation list of your phishing list that you're going to do some nefarious acts on and use that data. That is, and it's not regulated. So who knows what happens with that data? That's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we can spin out the problematic scenarios for hours and hours. Blackmail, profiling, employers, nefarious healthcare companies that are trying to deny coverage to people who have certain profiles. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. The market is kind of an amoral environment where people are trying to maximize revenue and maximize value, and ethics are not always part of that calculation, or you could argue often are not part of that calculation. So it's really legal and regulatory frameworks that put the brakes on certain kinds of bad behavior that these companies may well otherwise engage in. Now, luckily, the CEOs of Sam Altman and the CEO Claude and some of these other folks are fairly reflective about this, and they're talking openly about some of these issues. They're not simply saying this is all going to be beneficial for society and there's no downside. So that gives me hope, at least, that they are exposing the potential problems that need to be thought about, that are potentially socially disruptive or problematic for people.
Yeah, and there's precedents for this type of thing. Like, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, when the internet first started, became, the consumer advocacy group to create, here's what good behavior is, here's what bad behavior is, and
right.
We can't go spamming people.
Well, and that's right. And private consortiums or organizations need to step into the gap where government or public entities have either punted or don't know what to do or are stymied by gridlock or something like that. And that probably will happen. To help educate consumers and to try and provide some sort of self-regulatory framework.
Yeah. And the NAB did this as well, so that they wouldn't get shut down with what is indecent content and all this stuff as well. So there's some precedents for those kinds of frameworks, and hopefully it'll be interesting to see what happens in this accelerated environment as these apps are integrated. There's this concept called MCP is the big buzzword.
Yep.
So it's the idea is
model context protocol, I think.
Exactly. And so it's this new protocol to be able to weave together these different APIs and create interoperability there. But there are these risks that are inherent. So
I mean, I think it's a very, very exciting time. It's a time of uncertainty. People are trying to figure out all these things, but we need to be vigilant as a society. There's, I mean, I don't want to digress into political commentary, but we need to be vigilant about all these potentially negative impacts, even as we embrace the technology and all that it is capable of doing. And I'm as much of a AI junkie now as anybody. I mean, I just couldn't do my job without AI, which is a remarkable thing to say. Or I could do it, but it would take me much, much longer to do the things that I'm doing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, this is great. I think we dug into our notes from the field with that as well. So thanks for a great episode. Thank you everybody for listening today. We look forward to
We'll be
hearing.
back with more guys next time.
We'll see you next week. Thanks so much.